Disclaimer: the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the Met, or any institutions or publications cited or used in this presentation did not approve or condone any statement or analysis of materials in any official matter. The use of materials is for strictly educational purposes to show materials for debates within the African American community. The use of materials is not for any commercial or theatrical purposes and not for pay, but for encouraging the public to go to these institutions and museums to see actual artifacts to better understand history and repair miseducation. As a supplement to the information presented, I do want to add this article from Science, August 30th, 2019, late Upper Paleolithic occupation at Coopers Ferry, Idaho, USA, 16,000 years ago. Basically, the article is talking about the continent America's Aboriginals came by sea. The continent of the Americas were the last human-populated continent, and the latest scientific finds show that the trans-Pacific migration was probably sea-based. From this article, the early occupation of America, the Coopers Ferry archaeological site in western North America has provided evidence for the pattern and time course of the early peopling of the Americas. Davis et al. Described new evidence of human activity from this site, including stem projectile points. Radiocarbon dating and Bayesian analysis indicate an age between 16,560 and 15,280 years before present. Humans therefore arrived in the Americas before an inland ice-free corridor had opened, so a Pacific coastal route was the probable entry route. The stem projectile points closely resemble those found in Upper Paleolithic Japan, also supporting the hypotheses of a coastal route. Science, page 890. So the Aboriginal community must refute or take in the following bits of information. This is a map that you can find on the Trans-Pacific Project. This map has two particular possible routes. One northern route with the inland ice across the ice bridges, and the other one basically a sea boat route from the Oceanics. Whether the Native Americans or the Aboriginals came to America in the period described, they came from most likely these routes, and the Oceanic route on the bottom, or the other Asian route coming from Japan to maybe, or the other one from maybe the Beringia to North America. At any rate, these groups of people are not the same as the groups of people in America called the descendants of the African continent, the descendants of the slave trade, Black Americans, Negroes, African Americans, or any of those titles. The group of people who are largely our people are associated with the transatlantic slave trade on the other side, and that DNA and other scientific evidence will show that those are two different groups of people. So the original Aboriginals are migrants from the Pacific islands or from the ice passage, are not our people, and it doesn't matter. All of this happened about 20,000 years ago. And so to say that our people were already here, you're talking about different parts of the human family, and then maybe some type of intermixing, but the large part of us come from the transatlantic slave trade and not this. And so the information earlier that I presented in my walk looking at artifacts, or about those people, the Oceanic people, though they may have similar phenotypes, they are not us.
Why? Why? Black and I'm why? You, hey. foundation, original cornerstone. All road leads to one, not my opinion. Check etymology and science, prove nothing was before carbon.
Basically, this is the Aboriginal section. And the Aboriginal section is a group in this museum, of artifacts of pretty much South America, and not necessarily North America, but pretty much the South Americas. And that's an important part, because the people who are claiming that these are our people, or we are these people, are saying that we are connected to these people. So we're going to look at some of the art and artifacts of this group. These are some good images to begin to work with, right? The people who are saying that we are Aboriginals are saying that these are figures that particularly come from Mexico, right? That these are our parent people. These are the parent people of the people that we call Black in America. And some people, of course, are saying that we were in we were in the Americas first, and then we were transported to either Africa or transported to Europe. But nevertheless, scientifically, we have to understand that the continents of North America and South America was the last populated continents of African of peoples in general, and that all these people are in the evolutionary human evolution chain, or younger people, and they came from two major places, Asia, right, and possibly the Oceanics. So we're going to show some of that in a very few minutes. But I want you to see some of the artifacts and let you know that they are saying that these groups of people, are our parent people, and we came because they were in Americas for maybe about 15,000 years ago, sometime maybe 12,000, and their parent peoples are our ancestors. And so that means that we should have genetic information from these groups of people, and we should be the same genetically, and these are our parent people. Okay, so let's take a picture of that over there. Take a picture of that. Okay. So these are our parent people, and take a picture right there, Baba, of that map. Okay. So the European discovery of America came with the discovery of these items from Peru, particularly the Inca civilization, and that the people who are saying that we are the Aboriginals are saying that, in fact, that this material was the material of our ancestors, and we came from it, and this was the culture of our people, and not the great culture of Africa. And though they don't have a explanation or even a timeline of African civilization, how long it lasted, the first humans, they seem to want to say our people, and kind of forget about the timeline of Africa and the migrations of people out of Africa into the places, and not even understand that the people of Africa migrated out of Africa into Asia, and then into the Asia to Oceania, and then by ship or by land bridge wound it in the Americas. So the Native Americans, or the Aboriginals of the United States, or in South America, are only the parent people of themselves, and not the parent people of other groups. So this particular exhibit is the Aboriginals of the Dominican Republic, right, prior to the Africans coming. So they, people play with things like, well, they have Taino ancestry and they don't have African ancestry, but this is the images of the Aboriginals of the islands, particularly Dominican Republic. Now, the people who say that we are Aboriginals discount the intermixing of the African with these group of people, and the African people were the parent people of these people, but hundreds of thousands of years separated, or from the out of Africa migration into Asia. So ultimately, these are the Tainos, the artifacts of the Tainos. Let's go find some more. We're just going to go from section to section, picking up images of the Aboriginals. These are the Aztecs. So I've done the Incas, I've done the Aztecs, I've done the Tainos. Let's go and look at Mesoamerica. Here is the images, good images of the Aztecs, the Mesoamericans. So let's just take a look at some. They are saying that culturally, biologically, that these are our parent people. So the question is, if some of these people look like this in the 15th century, how do we change phenotypically from looking like images like this to the way that we look? That is something that they have to explain. Okay. The top, it's here, and the bottom, and the bottom. The citation. So, we've seen some images of the Native Americans, at least in art, and we're going to look at art and artifacts just to contrast to the African people of the continent of Africa, who history says, facts say, artifacts say that there was a slave trade and that we were moved. So Central Africa, Savannah. Let's take a look at the Laga people. Let's take a picture of the Laga to see if those are phenotypically the people that we are. Let's look at some of the art artifacts to see if this aligns to African people. We're talking about the hair, we're talking about the features, and let's look at the Yaka and Pende people, right, from the Democratic of Congo. And people have to know that America is commemorating the slave trade, and that some of the first Africans that landed in Virginia were from Angola and Congo. So these are the people who landed. These are the people. Now the question is, are we more related to these people, or are we related to the art and artifacts of the Aboriginals of the continents of North and South America? And so we're just going to take a look at a few more art and artifacts to show an African people, because see, the chronology is a very important thing when you're dealing with this information. So these people are thousands of years old in the continent of Africa, and so they have particular features, particular culture, and the issue is any of this culture in the Mesoamericas, the islands of the Caribbean, of North America, any of this culture, when did this culture come to the Americas? Did the people of the slave trade bring this culture, or did they already? What culture was they using when they came? Were they using the concepts of the Yoruba, or was they African Islamic? Were they African Christians? Did they practice Akan? What were the practices of the people here that we know of? Or did they give names like Nani, or did they give Mesoamerican names? So we have to take into, when we do this analysis, and we come to museums and stuff, to look at the primaries, to do things like contrast. It's not a look-see. It's basically contrasting culture, sometimes contrasting language, contrasting religious ideas, doing a contrast. And so we know here that from that display, these are the Congo people. And these are some of the groups that came to the Americas during the slave trade. And then there's certainly the West Africans. So let's just go to the West Africans. Again, this is Democratic Republic of Congo, and these concepts, do they find these cultural concepts? Do we find them in our tradition in the Americas? This is for them very spiritual. You can see that this particular figure is a symbol of power. The necklace. The person is bonded. That's how strong the power is. The person has magic in its belly button. The person has feathers, and most likely hair. And the person, when I mean the person, or the Africans believe that this is a living being, and you can tell that they would make their concepts real because it's sweating, it's alive. In the African belief system, it's alive, and it has magic on the feet. The question is, do these beliefs follow the African American cultural experience in America? Do we believe concepts more like this, or do we believe more concepts of Native Americans? I'm talking about our parents, right? The things that come with us, the stories, the slave narratives. Do they believe these things, the concepts along this, or do they talk about their homeland in areas that we can align to North America, South America, or Central America? I think that our ancestors speak to homelands in the Congo and into West Africa. So we're in the West African section, and this is the section where a large majority of us came from the narratives of the slave trade from West Africa. And you have Ghana, you have Ivory Coast, you have Benin, you have Nigeria, you have Guinea, and the European got two major things out of Africa: the human labor and the resources, the gold and the silver and now the other materials. Now this is a picture of the people of the Akan people. And the question is, are we more aligned with these groups of people phenotypically and culturally then are we aligned with saying that our ancestors worship Native American practices? So the question is our practices from the narratives, from the written narratives, does it align to practices aligned with the Native Americans versus the African? That's over there is Nigeria, real quick. And now show me this piece. Okay, so this is one of the classic pieces, original. This is a pendant of a queen mother, right? And this is Africans encountering Europeans, because this queen mother in Nigeria has found herself involved in the slave trade. And she is showing her power because on this Queen Mother pendant or Europeans. So we have this direct relationship between the African and the European in the art of the African. Even if it reflects, and look at her collar. So she's just showing her awesome power when it comes to her unfortunate, devastating relationship with Europeans, and showing that she's wielding their power against African people, or that she has them in her hair. We use this to kind of understand our relationship with the Europeans. This particular, these concepts, right? So to say this is in the 16th century, right? To say that we were not enslaved and there was no slave ships and there was no relationship. Well, this is 16th century. This is part of the height of the slave trade. And so we have this art artifact. Okay, so in looking at possible migration concepts about how the Aboriginals, that they call the Aboriginals, and they're really not Aboriginals, but they become the Aboriginals of the Americas. The Americas is over here. That's where the Americas are. And we have two prevailing theories. One is that early man, somewhere on this part of the map, crossed the Bering Strait, and the ice sheets, and crossed into the United States and Canada and the United States and Mexico and South America. And we have the prevailing theory that they walked or they took ships. And there are these stoppage points in Canada and the United States on the shoreline, in which these groups of people from Asia came. And then we have a unlooked, not well articulated migration theory that Africans who had how can I say, admixed, came from China and India as earlier, and then went into the Pacific Islands, right, which they call Micronesia, and these other, the Lesser Sunda Islands, and then Australia, and then the other islands, and they got to each of these islands by ships, right? And so there's a long history of people migrating by ships, where up on top is more like the Ice Age, and this was the ocean, the Pacific Ocean. And so the other migration theory is that instead of the ships from Beringer all the way down to the coastlines, you have the migration from here to the Americas, to the coast. If they can get from here, you have waves of people on ships with the sea culture, and they end up in the Americas. Now, interesting that I'm going to show you some of what these people look like, and they are phenotypically closer to the African American rather than the Native American, but they're not the same people. And so what I'm just trying to say, it doesn't matter if they came from, from the Beringer, or from, the top of that part of Asia by land or by ship, or they came from the Pacific Islands to the Americas, they're still not us.
I repeat, there are many tribes from Asia, India, and the Oceania, but they are not us.
So, we're in a section of the Oceanic, and this is a very interesting section for us. New Guinea, Papua New Guinea, Polynesia, those islands that I discussed. Now, the phenotypes of these people look like us, and because they are, how can I say, on the evolutionary chain, they have admixed left with the Asians. And so, let's take a look. So, on first glance, it can almost look like African art. Look at it. Certainly, we can contrast these masks, and we can contrast these ceremonial costumes to Africa, but this is still, and look, they have cowrie shells, right? But the issue is, it's some of the cultural concepts in the human mind may be similar, but there's definitely phenotypical issues, and our ancestors here don't point back to the Pacific Islands. So this is what they look like here. If you can get a picture of that, right? The ceremonial, and let's look. So you would find these types of phenotypes in Australia, right? The so-called Tasmanian, who they wiped almost completely out of Australia. And here is actual artifacts of these people. Now, they have cowrie shells, they have locks, or they are people. Do we descend from them?
Yep.
You're saying yes?
Yes.
How are you saying we descended from them?
You can see everything, the culture, the cowrie shells, the hair, the phenotype, everything.
Baba, the African American did not descend from them. We descended from continental Africans. They descended from continental Africans. Just because we both share continental African phenotypes, right, doesn't mean that we are the same. Right? They descended from Africa, and but the evolutionary time is different than descending from the Americans.
Okay.
So, just because people look like have phenotypical similarities, don't mean that they're the same. So I showed you Africans who are younger on the evolutionary chain, who have less admixture with the Asians, who those Oceanic people look like, and they look similar to African people from the continent. The only difference is that those groups of people still had admixture with the Asians and other groups of people, and so the phenotypes in the DNA is different. So we're looking at cultural concepts of these groups of people, but I want to say that that those groups of people in those migrations had more admixture with the other populations of evolving populations of humans, the Asians and the West Africans and the Central Africans. They're indigenous. They are just who they are. They're the original people. So on the issue of the apples, is they have to discuss how did people get to the Americas, and when they do, then they have to look at a chronology. Those people who are in the Americas are not in the Americas for longer than at best 20,000 years, and they migrate slowly from those other places. The bulk of our people who were brought here from the African slave trade directly from Africa. So the art and artifacts and the science will bear this out, and I have more that I'll read to you a little bit later about the oldest finds in the Americas to bolster my claim, support my claim that the migration time period of the Americans.